Charisse set her fork down with the kind of dramatic pause that always meant she was about to announce something self-serving. "Your house is perfect for my birthday this year," she said, flashing her rehearsed smile. Not a question, just a declaration. Rowan kept chewing, didn't look at me. That said enough. I set down my coffee slowly. "Oh, the yard's huge, parking's easy," she continued, folding her hands like she was presenting a pitch. "It's got this rustic, cozy feel that would be so cute in pictures. And you're not really using it right." She said it like I'd been squatting in my own home, taking up space until someone else had a better use for it. I looked at her, then at my son. He still didn't say a word, just kept eating as if the roast chicken needed all his attention. I smiled, not wide, just enough. "Good thing I already prepared your gift," I said. Charisse beamed. "Oh my God, really? What is it you'll see?" I said. "It's very thoughtful." She looked pleased with herself, already dreaming up table arrangements and hashtags. I excused myself early that evening. Said I had a bit of a headache. The truth was, if I'd stayed 1 minute longer, I might have said something that wouldn't fit my usual calm. Back in my kitchen, I stood by the window looking out at the garden she had casually claimed. My garden. The one I'd dug, weeded, and planted after Walter passed, where the birds came in spring, where the wind made the tall grass dance every morning like a ritual only I understood. She didn't see any of that. All she saw was space and a free maid. But that was fine. She wanted to use my home for her party. Perfect. Because I already knew exactly who'd be here that day. And none of them would be on her guest list. 2 days later, her email arrived, long bulleted and casually entitled, "Party Flow." Just 32 people, Charisse wrote. Close friends and a few from Rowan's office. "I'll bring the tables. You can handle drinks, snacks, flowers, and some light bites. Maybe those lemon scones you made last Easter, or your apple loaf." Everyone loved that. Then, as if it were an afterthought, she added, "Oh, and if the kids come, you can wrangle them. They adore you. You're so good at that kind of thing." I stared at the screen, rereading the words. There was no question mark anywhere in the email, not one. Just a list of assumptions wrapped in sugar, but sharp as pins. Rowan hadn't called. Not even a quick check-in to say, "Hey, Mom, is this all right?" Nothing. His silence did more damage than her gall ever could. I clicked reply. Typed one word. Noted. Then I closed my laptop and sat for a moment in the quiet. Outside, the wind was rustling through the trees. Inside, the kettle was starting to hum. I rose slowly and crossed to the little drawer by the fridge, the one with old envelopes masking tape, and a few saved numbers scribbled on scraps of paper. I pulled out a folded yellow Post-it. Mosswood Foster Center. Direct line. I hadn't called in a while, not since spring, but I'd spent years volunteering there after I retired. I still remembered the kids' faces, the way they lit up over the smallest things, a cupcake, a paper crown, a kind voice. I stared at the number for a long moment, then placed it gently by the phone. Charisse wanted a party. She'd get one, just not the one she planned. The next morning, I pulled into the gravel lot outside Mosswood Foster Home. The building looked just as I remembered: chipped blue siding, creaky front steps, and wind chimes that sang in the silence. I hadn't been back in a while. Life got away from me, and grief had a way of making even kindness feel heavy. But today, the weight felt useful. The director, Miss Allen, blinked when she saw me. "Ms. Voigt, what a surprise." I smiled. "Do any of the children have birthdays this month?" She opened a folder on her desk. "Let's see. 8 of them. Ages 4 to 11. All boys this time, actually. Most don't have plans. I'd like to host something for them," I said. "In my garden. Just a little celebration, games, food, crafts. No cameras, no fuss. Just joy." She looked up slowly, softening. You always did bring the best glitter glue. I laughed. Still got 3 tubs in my garage. She handed me the updated contact forms and dietary notes. I promised to send over a detailed plan, something safe, structured, and easy to supervise. She offered to bring 2 staff members to help. I said I'd cover their lunch. Back at home, I pulled out a notebook and started sketching out ideas. Ring toss, watercolor bookmarks, DIY cupcakes, maybe a flower pot station. I'd call up Marnie, my old colleague, who still ran that kid's bookmobile. She owed me a favor and had a knack for storytelling. Charisse had asked for a garden party. She'd get one, but instead of Prosecco and influencers, it would be paper crowns, chocolate frosting, and names that rarely got written on invitations. I stood at the window and looked out over the lawn, mentally measuring space for folding tables and a bounce mat. A breeze swept across the grass, carrying the scent of sun-warmed earth. Yes, there would be a party, and everyone who mattered would be there. The sun was high by the time Charisse's car pulled into the drive. A glossy black SUV loaded with pastel balloons and 2 tiered boxes marked custom cake. She stepped out in stilettos, holding a balloon arch like a trophy, her sunglasses perched high on her head. She froze mid-step. The yard was already alive. Children darted between picnic tables, giggling through streams of bubble wands. Glitter glue sparkled under the trees. One table had paper crowns, another had cookie decorating. Streamers waved from the fence. In the center of it all, Micah, one of the smallest, was carefully applying frosting to a cupcake with intense focus. Charisse's mouth parted, but no words came. Rowan stood behind her, brows low. "What is this?" I stepped out from the side path, wiping my hands on a towel. "A birthday party." Rowan glanced at the balloon arch in her arms. "But? Not ours?" "No," I said, calm and steady. "Not yours." Charisse blinked. "You said you were preparing a gift." I nodded. "I did." She looked down at her boxes. "This cake is champagne buttercream. There's chocolate sheet cake on the buffet. No nuts, no dyes. Just safe and simple." She looked like she was about to say something sharp, but then one of the boys ran up to her and held out a hand-painted rock. "This is for you," he said. "I made it. It's a lucky one." She didn't take it. He shrugged and ran off again, unbothered. Rowan exhaled slowly. "Mom, you planned this whole thing." I did. For them, I met his eyes. Because someone should. Behind us, more cars pulled up, other volunteers, shelter staff. Charisse stepped aside as 2 teenagers carried in a tub of sidewalk chalk and storybooks. For the first time all day, she said nothing, and in that silence, I walked back into the garden where the children were already lining up for the puppet show. Charisse's friends stood in a confused clump near the edge of the garden, still holding their phone cameras, like weapons that had lost signal. One of them was already kneeling beside the glitter table, surrounded by 3 toddlers, demanding help with stickers and glue. Another, in a dress far too delicate for this setting, was now refereeing a very passionate cupcake-eating contest. Her father had somehow been lured into a Connect 4 tournament with 2 8-year-olds who showed no mercy. Her mother was sitting cross-legged on a picnic blanket being fitted with a paper crown that said, "Queen of the Bounce House." Even the DJ, late and clearly baffled, had been handed a children's storybook and was now reading the Gruffalo aloud in a surprisingly theatrical voice. Every time he tried to segue into music, a small crowd of kids yelled, "Another story." Charisse stood rigid beside the folding chair I'd offered her heels, digging into the grass expression, souring by the second. "I didn't agree to this," she hissed, low enough for only me to hear. I turned from the drink station and looked her in the eye. "You asked to host a birthday here," I said evenly. "I simply helped make it meaningful." She scoffed. "You ambushed me." I folded a napkin slowly. "No, I just didn't let you ambush me first." From across the yard, one of the little boys shrieked with laughter as his frosting-covered hands slipped off the plastic bowling ball. It rolled right through a group of startled adults, most of whom were now sitting crisscross, helping assemble a giant paper mural titled, "What Makes You Happy?" The answer apparently included a lot of pizza space rockets and oddly shaped cats. The smell of cake and barbecue wafted through the air. The grass was littered with party hats and glittery footprints. Kids laughed, tumbled, painted, sang. Charisse opened her mouth again, then closed it, because nothing she could say would be louder than joy. And frankly, I wasn't listening anymore. I was too busy helping one of the youngest girls spell butterfly in glitter letters. I was pouring lemonade into plastic cups when Rowan appeared beside me. Hands shoved in his pockets, mouth set in a hard line. "You ambushed her," he muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. I set the pitcher down and turned slowly. "You both ambushed me first." He looked away. Didn't argue. Didn't apologize either. "You could have just said no," he said after a moment. I took my time wiping condensation off the tablecloth. "I did better," I replied. I said nothing and let the truth do the work. He glanced back at the yard. Micah was tugging at a woman's hand, guiding her toward the coloring table. Another boy was carefully balancing a cupcake on a paper plate tongue, sticking out in concentration. "Charisse didn't mean harm," Rowan said. I raised an eyebrow. She didn't mean kindness either. He looked down, then out at the scene unfolding his wife, awkwardly, tying streamers to a tree. One eye on her shoes, the other on the children, forming a line behind her for balloon animals. "They're just kids," he said quietly. "Yes," I replied. "And they've already had to grow up faster than they should. The least I could do is give them one day of joy." A small hand tapped his elbow. Micah again. "Hey, mister. You want a race? I bet you can't beat me to the fence." Rowan blinked, startled. Micah was already running. And to my surprise, Rowan didn't hesitate long. He took off after him, suit jacket flapping behind him like a misplaced kite. The yard erupted in cheers as they ran. I watched from the shade hands, still on the pitcher, a quiet ache rising in my chest. There had been a time Rowan ran like that through this same yard, with a toy sword, with cake on his face, with wild freedom that hadn't yet been shaped into silence. Maybe that version of him wasn't completely gone. Maybe he just needed a reason to return. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the garden. Most of the balloons had sagged, the cupcakes were crumbs, and the children had finally begun to slow. Charisse sat stiffly on a folding chair near the lemonade table, arms crossed, phone untouched in her lap. Her friends had long since slipped away, citing dinner plans or vague errands. Only a handful of volunteers remained tidying up and wiping down tables. Micah wandered over to her small and sun-kissed, holding something in both hands. He stopped in front of her, looked up and smiled shyly. "Happy birthday," he said, and held out a card. It was crumpled and bent, the edges sticky with frosting. Stickers were plastered across the front stars puppies, a half-torn dinosaur, and inside, uneven letters spelled out, "To Karis. I hope you had fun," from Micah. Her brows lifted. She blinked like she wasn't sure what she was looking at. For a moment, I thought she might correct the spelling, or offer one of her polite little smiles and place it beside her purse like a used napkin. But she didn't. She just stared at it, wordless. Then a second child ran up and hugged her leg. No warning. Just arms around her knee head resting against her like it was the most natural thing in the world. Charisse stiffened, then glanced around, perhaps looking for someone to intervene to rescue her. No one came. Micah was still standing there, eyes hopeful. She took the card. "Thanks," she said, her voice low and strange. He beamed and skipped away. I watched the whole thing from across the yard broom in hand, not moving, not judging, just watching. There was something in her face, something small, cracking open. Not remorse, not grace, but maybe the first sliver of understanding. A realization that birthday decorations and curated playlists could never match the power of a child's unfiltered affection. And in that fragile moment, I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt still, like maybe something had finally begun. Charisse left before the sun had fully set. No goodbyes. No thank yous. She slipped away through the side gate, her arms empty, the card Micah gave her tucked under one elbow. I didn't follow. The next morning, her usual flood of social media posts never came. No pictures of custom cocktails. No balloon arches with her hashtag of the month. No selfies angled just right beside her cake. Her page stayed blank silent in a way that said more than any caption could. I didn't say anything to Rowan. If he noticed, he didn't bring it up either. But 2 days later, he showed up at my door. Alone. He looked tired but less defensive than before. He held out a bag of groceries like a peace offering: coffee beans, almond milk, my favorite rye bread. She's embarrassed, he said after I set the kettle on. She should be. I replied, not cruelly. Just fact. But that doesn't mean she can't learn. He nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. She hasn't stopped thinking about it. She doesn't have to perform a transformation. Just take the first real step. He looked at me. She asked if she could volunteer. At Mosswood. Next month. I raised an eyebrow. Now, that's a better birthday resolution. He smiled just a little. She said, it was the first time a kid made her something just because. No strings. There never should have been strings, I said softly. But she was raised to believe there always were. He took a seat at the counter, watching the kettle steam. You know, he said, when I was a kid, I never realized how much you planned around joy. That was the point, I said. You weren't supposed to. He looked down at his hands, then up at me. I think we forgot how to be part of something bigger. Then start remembering? I said, placing 2 mugs on the counter. He stayed for coffee. He even helped slice fruit. And for the first time in years, the kitchen didn't feel like a bridge between us. It felt like home. The letter came on a Monday. No return address, just careful block letters on the envelope. To Miss Adrena. The handwriting was uneven, a few backwards letters here and there, but I knew immediately who it was from. Inside, the note was written on lined paper from a school notebook. Thank you for the best birthday ever. I liked the cupcakes and the pirate hat, and when you let me put sprinkles on everything. I hope you're my grandma one day. Love, Micah. I sat at the table for a long time, just holding the note in my hands. Micah didn't know my history. He didn't know the years I spent holding on to family while it slipped away, one piece at a time, first Walter, then the slow erosion of what Rowan and I used to be. He didn't know how many birthdays I'd spent baking for others, organizing for others, smiling for others, and ending up with silence. But somehow, that little boy saw me, and he wanted me. Not for a party, not for a service, just for who I was. I stood up and walked to the bookshelf to the corner where I kept the framed photo of Walter and me from our trip to Port Townsend. I slipped Micah's letter beside it just under the frame's edge so it would stay flat. His note leaned against the memory of a man who had always understood quiet legacy. I hadn't smiled like that in years. Outside the kitchen window, the garden still held remnants of the celebration. A few streamers clung to the back fence. A paper crown had found a home beneath the rose bush. The grass had flattened in places where children had run wild and free. The house felt lighter, not just clean but full, like it had taken a long breath and finally exhaled. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, sat by the window, and let the warmth of it settle into my chest. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something return. Not control. Not pride. Peace. We had dinner on the patio, just the 3 of us. The evening air was warm and the garden was calm again. the hum of cicadas replacing the laughter that had filled it only a week before. Rowan refilled his plate, then looked up at me. "Will you host again next year?" I took a slow sip of coffee. "Absolutely." He laughed, a little nervous. Even with Charisse, I didn't flinch. Especially with her. Charisse, sitting across from me, didn't smile, but she didn't roll her eyes either. That was enough for now. I leaned forward, resting my cup on the table. "Next year, I'll prepare something even more meaningful." Charisse's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Her eyes met mine, not defensive, not challenging. Just present. She didn't say anything, but she didn't look away. That was new. Rowan cleared his throat. "She's been thinking about starting a small book drive. For Mosswood?" I nodded. "That would be a good start." I told her it doesn't have to be perfect, he added. "It just has to be real," I said. Charisse returned to her meal without a word. But when she reached for her glass, her hands were steady. After they left, I stood in the garden alone, letting the quiet settle in again. The chairs were stacked, the table cleared, but the energy lingered like a house that remembered laughter and knew it would return. I walked the length of the yard, stopping where the paper mural had once hung. I could still see faint bits of tape on the fence. In my head, I could hear the children shouting answers, pizza frogs, friendship. Some gifts don't come wrapped. Some aren't even meant for you. But sometimes, offering joy to others becomes the only gift you need to feel whole again. Next year, there would be new names, new stories, new sprinkles on cupcakes. And maybe, if we were lucky, new hearts cracked open just enough to let in something better. I turned back toward the house. Lights glowing warm, coffee still on the stove, and a place finally where I belonged again.